When I started in the adult industry as a trans guy, there were like four of us. Visibility is one of those things that only is a benefit if people are receptive to it, to learning, to
Mm.
exploring. Visibility without those things actually only paints a target. I'm a big, bearded, hairy, bald guy. Of course, I don't belong in women's spaces. I would be uncomfortable there. She would be uncomfortable there. We end up in the situation of, do you look man enough or do you look woman
Mhm.
enough? And I actually don't think that that's the right framework. The framework is more, who are you when you encounter something that is irrational, bigoted, just downright mean spirited? That's a place to stick up. Use whatever privilege you have, whether it's white privilege, cis privilege, male privilege. There's a really fine line between fetishization and appreciation of someone.
We had a big worry about using the wrong language.
My answer is the same answer I have for almost everything. Approach with curiosity, approach with good faith, approach with a willingness to learn and be correct. People absolutely feel entitled to a full explanation of our bodies. The group of people who has the most similar experience are actually people with visible and physical disabilities who are constantly expected to explain their bodies, explain how their bodies work, explain how to go to the bathroom.
How do I know if a life coach is something that would work for me? What should I look for in a good life coach?
Is there a good connection with this person? Is there a good click? Are they a good listener? Do they ask good questions? Do I feel seen? Do I feel heard?
Hi, I'm Azamat.
And I'm Oliver, and we're the founders of Friend of Dorothy.
Today, we're excited to have Trip Richards as a guest, FTM entertainer and educator, life coach, and personal trainer.
I'm Trip Richards, aka Triple X Trans Man on the internet. I have been an active sex worker for a little bit over 12 years now. I also have been in the life coaching and personal training spaces for about 18 years. And I also do a lot of sex education, both through the pornography work as well as separately.
Wow.
Wow. Trip, first of all,
So I'm
18
busy.
years. I thought you were like 30 years old. So how have you been doing it 18 years?
Well, we're coming up on me being 36, and I started when I was 18.
Oh, wow.
So that would be the math.
You look even younger. It's
Uh,
making me feel bad.
It's just good lighting.
Same. Trip, we usually ask our guests to give us a little bit of introduction about themselves.
Sure, I know people are really curious, kind of the contextualization of like, how did I get here? How did we end up here? So I actually grew up very rural. I am very much a country boy at heart. From the standpoint of kind of these convos around gender, sexuality, I really did not have any language about that growing up. I think of myself as growing up very conservative. These were not topics that I grew up with a lot of open convo around. And it's really been a process for me through my teen years, starting to come out as a queer person, trying to figure out, what am I? What is identity? And trying to figure out a lot of those things really in a vacuum, not having a lot of friends, not having a lot of really education on these things to begin with. It's really was that ongoing process of coming out in my teens, kind of refining some of this in my early 20s, starting to read more, meet more people, meet other queer folk, read feminist literature, read queer theory. And it's really been like this flourishing, coming from like having no background.
It sounds like it was a lot of self-education because
Very
probably there
much.
was not much of representation. Yeah.
I think that that's one thing that's really a little bit unique about the experience of some, trans and queer folk coming up right now is for all the horribleness in the world, which I'm sure we will get to talk about if we wish. There is a lot more info out there. There's YouTube videos, there's TikTok, there's just like more conversations around these things. I grew up without internet. This is just a little bit of a different era and different place.
And we totally see that not only on social media. I think even when you look at the adult industry, There are way more FTM representation.
Yeah, I mean, when I started in the adult industry as a trans guy, there were like 4 of us.
Yeah.
It was super, super niche. I really did not know that there would be any kind of market or receptivity. And now I look around and it's like every day, there's like a new trans performer. And I love that. I mean, I think that there's a lot of complexities around the adult industry. Nothing is an unadulterated positive or negative experience. But broadly speaking, I think that just showing a diversity of bodies, diversity of, presentation, diversity of actual behavior on screen, I think that that's kind of only a benefit to show what's out there.
I have a theory, Trip, if I can put it to you. I would say I never came across trans porn until I was
Mhm,
into my 40s, and I'm only
mhm,
43 now. And it never, prior to that, it's never something I would have gone looking for. Or has
mhm.
someone asked me, was I interested in it? It's never something I would be like, yes, okay, that's going to float my boat. That will get me to where I need to be. Yet now I come across it and
Mhm,
I've used trans porn. I guess my question is this. Do you find that many people who were never interested in particularly trans men have,
mhm.
because of the visibility, now it's just people are genuinely more interested in it, or they were always interested, there just wasn't the content there for them?
Probably a little bit of both. I think that those are kind of experiences that can coexist. I will say over the, years that I've been visible as a trans performer, I have had so many conversations with men, mostly gay men over the years, who are like, I never knew that I was into this until I saw you. And I do think that there's a lot to be said for like the theory of mere exposure. Like being exposed to things
Hmm.
makes us comfortable with them. I want to be clear that I'm not talking like indoctrination or something,
Yeah, yeah.
but just kind of seeing what's out there. I think for a lot of people, it's been very eye opening.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. And I think that's amazing. It allows us as a community, it's allowed us to grow, but also to make it easier for trans people in everyday life to be more visible.
Can I maybe give a little bit of a thought on that?
Yeah, yeah, please.
Yeah, I think visibility is a real double edged sword. If we'd had this conversation 5 or 7 years ago, I would have been like, yes, absolutely. Visibility is good. It's normalizing, it's destigmatizing. But I also have to kind of position us in this current political moment, obviously in the US and the rise of fascism and extremism and trans people being very much in the crosshairs. And that is unfortunately true really around the globe in a lot of places. Now, I think visibility is one of those things that only is a benefit if people are receptive to it, to learning, to
Mm.
exploring, to leading with compassion, leading with empathy. Visibility without those things actually only paints a target. And I find myself really caught in this moment of what would be good for the community? What would even be good for me as an individual?
Interesting. We were discussing this earlier today. So here, I don't know if you know about the political climate here in the UK. There was
Yes.
recently a legal ruling that
Mhm.
means people have to use the bathroom they were assigned at birth, which means, so there's three of us here on this conversation. Without a doubt, you are the manliest looking out of us all. And I just imagine, and you walking into a bathroom and my mum is there. Uh, like,
Mhm.
like, and
We know that's not where I belong.
that's
We
not where
we
you
know,
belong.
like, deeply that that is inappropriate.
People are not
Yeah,
targeting trans men. Who they're targeting is trans women going in the women's
right.
bathroom, and they're not bright enough to work out. Well, that goes the other way. I just think it's true. They're not bright enough.
I have so many thoughts about this, and I wanna say some of them.
Yeah.
But my main thought is, like, bigotry of any sort is going to fall apart under even the most cursory examination.
Hmm.
Just, like, thinking about it for 2 seconds, and any form of bigotry, discrimination, whatever, it is so inherently illogical. It is not grounded in reality. It is not grounded in lived experience. And yet here we are. But I do have a couple thoughts on bathroom stuff because here in the United States, we have very similar situations unfolding. And I simultaneously hear what you're saying and chuckle of like, yes, I'm a big bearded, hairy, bald guy. Of course, I don't belong in women's faces. I would be uncomfortable there. She would be uncomfortable there. And I also kind of want to pull it back and be like, it's not just me as an individual. People look all kinds of different ways, regardless of gender identity, regardless of if they are trans, even where they are in their transition. Everyone looks different. And once we start doing kind of appearance-based purity tests, sorry, complicated sentence there, we end up in the situation of, do you look man enough or do you look woman
Mhm.
enough? And I actually don't think that that's the right framework. The framework is more, who are you? Because let's be real, plenty of cisgender people are not strictly gender conforming. Not every woman has long hair and big boobs and, fully done makeup every time she walks out. And what we see over and over with these kind of discriminatory policies, especially around bathrooms, is that cisgender people actually end up getting caught in it. Like even when there is an attempt to simply harm trans people, nice and simple, fuck the trans people, it ends up coming back at all of us.
Interesting. Yeah, I fully agree. I would say I'm almost guilty of that. Like in my head, when I think about it, I always think about it based on how does a person predominantly present, which is actually the wrong way of doing it. And the worst thing is, yeah, the trans community have become targets for this. Um, when actually, I think they are certainly what I read in the media. They're the people least likely to be out commit. I mean, just because they're such a small community as well, but they're the people least likely to be worried about. Women should be worried about the straight men who are actually doing the bad things. We were focusing on the wrong people. And exactly what you said, we're painting a target on people, just as scapegoats.
Okay.
I know we both certainly would like to know what we can do. As we're very fortunate, we live in London, in the capital city, and we don't get homophobia, or not necessarily, we don't feel
Mm.
attacked in the same way that other people might be. So I guess my question is, what can your average gay guy do to help?
Good question. I wish that I had a more concise answer to it because I think it is so situational. There is really no easy way for any individual to fight against fascism, to fight against these kind of like global cultural issues. But I don't want that to be taken as there's nothing you can do, more so a realism that there's not a silver bullet to this. What people can do, if you're, a straight person, a cisgender person, just, an ally, somebody who wants to be more informed, do the work, inform yourself. Gig education is a really good path towards more understanding of the world around us, our fellow human. In this case, it means following trans people. Many of us have social media, many of us write, many of us speak on things. Follow us, follow a diversity of perspectives there. Obviously, would love people to follow what I'm saying, but I speak in many ways for myself. I have a unique kind of trajectory here. There's as many voices as there are people out here. Start listening to them. And then when you encounter something that is irrational, bigoted, just downright mean-spirited, that's a place to stick up. That is a place to use whatever privilege you have, whether it's white privilege, cis privilege, male privilege, privilege within a particular space like a family or workplace. Speak up. When you hear
Mm.
something that's bullshit, speak up against it. Educate people, retell that story so that it's not only on a very discriminated against minority like trans people who be doing all of this work ourselves. I mean, really what I'm describing is allyship. Sit down, listen, and then stand up when you can.
Hmm. Nice. I
Like
like
that.
it.
Trip, it reminds me of the days when I worked in the corporate world and during, I don't know, Pink Day or Pride months,
Mhm.
we would have a panel for example, a female leader. I'll be there as a LGBT
Mhm.
representative, and we would answer questions from our colleagues on what are the day-to-day challenges that we have, right? For example, for my colleague who is a female leader, she would tell me stories like when she comes in to the meeting, um, the first thing that the client would think that the male guy is more senior than her. right? And I was like, oh, I never knew that. And then I would share that every time I get into the Uber, very often Uber driver would ask me, how's your wife doing, right? Did you come here with your wife? And I always had to make a decision what to say, right? Like, shall I correct him? Or shall I just say, yeah, my wife is fine, right? So
Yeah.
based on this, what kind of challenges do you have, Trip, on your daily basis that would help us to learn more about challenges for trans people, for trans community?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it really comes down to the idea of breaking down assumptions. And the first step of breaking down assumptions is even to realize that we have them. I think it's one of those things that's really personal to the individual. I don't think that there is some kind of like blanket trans experience here so much as a diversity of experiences that depends on all the intersectional factors that we know, like race, like culture, like location, socioeconomic status, job position. Broadly speaking, though, most trans people struggle with less stable employment, less stable housing, more experiences of physical violence, kind of the emotional violence of always having to explain ourselves, always having to come out, everything just being a little bit harder, whether it's pursuing medical care, paperwork that doesn't match our presentation or identity. I sometimes think that the hardest part for me being trans at this point, not in the kind of like global sense of being a hated minority, but more in the day to day, is the death by 1,000 paper cuts of logistical bullshit. Every time my insurance updates, there's something that changes in terms of gender affirming care. Every time that I have to fill out an application or something and they're asking for like, sex or birth sex, I'm like, what do I say? So I think of it as this kind of bureaucratic exhaustion. And I think that actually might lead me back into kind of an additional answer to your last question of what people can do. What friends, supporters, allies can do is ease that burden wherever possible. That means both advocating for systems that are um, more inclusive, language that is better on forms, on documents. And then also the really simple stuff, like if you have a trans friend, drive them to the Department of Motor Vehicles to update their driver's license. Go with them to a doctor's appointment and help advocate for them. I think those are a lot of the kind of direct actions that are really the antidote to the just continual exhaustion of having to explain yourself, fight against these systems. Honestly, also be a good listener. Some of the people who I appreciate the most in this world are the ones, and thank you for being part of this in the moment, are the ones who listen and kind of like engage with, oh shit, that's really hard, right? Just kind of like witnessing these things.
The examples you gave there, from my perspective, they're tiny things
Mhm.
I could do. They're
Yeah.
tiny,
Yeah.
but actually the amount they could assist is probably a lot. For what I have to give to the value to that person, it could be huge. And it's weird. You would just never think about it.
And maybe also if I can expand on that, because you're absolutely correct, I'm trying to expand on that last question and point there. Certainly in most places in the world now, unless somebody has seen me naked, they assume that I'm cisgender. And that can lead to some hilarious moments around medical care, assumptions of bodies and body parts. And I think just like helping people to, or encouraging people to not be making assumptions about who somebody is or what their body um, is just kind of good for everyone. That benefits everyone, not just trans people. This is some of the moments where I have to laugh and just be like, whoa, right. I got to explain something to you.
I'm sure there are some good and funny stories. I was wondering if you could share maybe some of them, which kind of, you look back and laugh.
I think I live kind of a very simple life that way, which is very counter to what a lot of people would kind of assume from my kind of public persona.
Yep.
So to try to answer your question, I think there's a bit of this kind of dichotomy of who am I in this moment? So most of the funny stories that I have are really through sex work. I used to webcam a lot. I used to stream a lot. And I really got to witness people having their first exposure to a trans guy. I've always streamed and worked as a man. So just kind of like witnessing people's reactions to like, oh, where's your dick, basically. And just seeing them like just losing their minds trying to figure out what the fuck they were seeing. It's kinda like I said, a bit of a rueful laughter because 'cause I'm like, "Okay, but this is just my body. Why are we having to go through this?
Mm.
Why am I having to explain this to you?" why am I having to hold your hand through this? But also it's kind of hilarious watching people have this moment of like, oh shit. I guess I find some amusement in that.
Trip, I have a question. I think it's probably quite a big one that most people who maybe don't have trans friends, etc., would have. And I know it's certainly something myself and Azamat have spoke about while preparing for today. We had a big worry about using the wrong language. I think this is something that people could genuinely worry about. I know both of us were a little bit worried about getting it wrong. What should people do if that is something they're concerned about?
My answer is the same answer I have for almost everything. Approach with curiosity, approach with good faith, approach with a willingness to learn and be correct. I think really the first one, just approaching any situation or person with curiosity is kind of how we should just move through the world. I
Mhm.
mean, literally asking questions. Ask somebody their pronouns. Ask somebody if it's in a more intimate situation. What terminology do you like for your body parts? And also, let's talk about pleasure. Let's talk about what feels good. Like I think that there's always needs to be this approach of I don't know everything, and that's okay, but I'm going to make a good faith attempt to learn, listen, and then incorporate accurately.
And is this something that happens? I would never just feel like I can talk to people about their body parts, just in general.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
a time and a place for that. And being trans, do you find that people feel that that is something more that they can ask you about as part of normal conversation?
Oh, yes. And I certainly, as a sex worker, it does frame the conversation more in that direction. But even outside of sex work, in my sort of civilian capacities, people absolutely feel entitled to a full explanation of our bodies, an intrusive explanation of our bodies. I think it may be the group of people who has the most similar experience in this case to trans people are actually people with visible and physical disabilities who are constantly expected to explain themselves, explain their bodies, explain how their bodies work, explain how to go to the bathroom, explain how they have sex. I think there's a lot of commonalities of when people are othered, when people are outside of the expected norm of bodies and shapes and all that, we carry this additional burden of always explaining ourselves, always educating, and really always trying to reassure the people around us and assure them of who we are, including our humanity. And yes, that is a huge burden to carry. I personally, because I place myself in positions of doing a lot of educational work. I do find myself a bit more willing to engage on those topics because, frankly, I would rather that somebody ask me those intrusive questions than their cousin or coworker or stranger. I'm kind of like, okay, I'll do this work for you. But yeah, really, we should all just be a little bit less nosy about people's intimate body parts unless we have a good reason to be there.
Yeah. You'd never just go up to a straight person and just randomly start asking about their body part. It would be so inappropriate. Um,
Mhm.
Trip, it reminded me about some sort of FAQ that it feels like is already shaping up in your head because people are
Mhm.
asking the same questions all the time, and you already have a page like, go to
Mhm.
my website, there's FAQ, read through
Oh, no,
it.
I have that actually.
Do you?
Yeah. I
oh,
haven't updated it in a while. Over my first, maybe 5 years in the adult industry, I was seeing such a commonality of questions where I'm like, oh, like these are the top 10 things that everyone asks. And most of them are kind of intrusive questions. Most of them are questions that I'm like, you probably should not be asking a stranger this. And yet here I am, and I am just a very open person, so I'm gonna answer it.
Do you think that you could share maybe 2 or 3 questions that's a very common?
One of the most common questions that people ask is like, how did you get a beard? Which is hilarious to me because I got a beard the exact same way that every other man does by having testosterone in my body. I have a beard and hair, and also I'm bald because testosterone. A lot of people, kind of a surprising number of people, are really, really sure that I have gotten genital surgery. So, like, that my downstairs is actually modified, as in I was born cisgender, which is just a really interesting kind of switcheroo there. But for clarity, no, I've not gotten any genital surgery. Everything down there is original plumbing. And often the phrase that's used around that is, why did you, quote, chop your cock off? And I'm like, okay, well, that's not how bottom surgery works anyway.
Somebody has actually
Well,
asked you the
frequently,
question.
yes.
Oh my, that's wild.
Right.
Okay, so that one's funny to me because it is simultaneously very affirming to me that I'm like, oh, okay, I clearly look very male, I present very male, therefore they're having a hard time imagining me ever being anything but a me. I'm also like, how are we here? Maybe we're not meant to understand every intimate detail of other. Let me see what other juicy ones I get asked here a lot. Um, well, this is maybe is one of the funniest ones to me. So, like, I do porn. Everyone knows I do porn. And yet I have fully gotten comments on solo videos or photos or whatever. Quote, have you taken cock in that hole? And I'm like, yes. And there's videos of it all over the internet. I think people have some just really weird ideas around like purity. Purity ideas show up when it comes to all bodies, especially trans bodies or how they perceive me. There's a lovely intersection of misogyny in here, which is really a lot of what my work ends up being of destigmatizing human sexuality.
What's the way you're dealing with this? Like, are you patiently explaining, or you're like, there's a page on my website about this? Like, how do you usually deal with this?
It's a good question. I think it really depends on what kind of day people catch me on, kind of what my emotional bandwidth to do the explaining, tolerance in that moment. If somebody comes at me with more like open curiosity, I absolutely will engage with it. But I think you also have to have a little bit of a filter to know when people are just saying things to be provocative, saying things to be cruel. And I try to filter out those and just not engage really for my own health, my own sense of stability.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense.
So I have a question about basically
Mhm.
people fetishizing trans men. Yeah. Is it okay? Is it bad to have a fetish for a trans man?
Mm-mm. So I think that there is a really fine line between fetishization and appreciation of someone. And the way that I always try to explain this is that everyone wants to be appreciated. Obviously, I don't want to be intimate with somebody who does not appreciate me for my full personhood, including my body. But when it verges into fetishization is when somebody has their own script, their own ideas about me, about how intimacy might go, who I am, that doesn't really have input from me. So it starts becoming fetishizing when something is very one dimensional and really does not look at me as this full, complicated human, but instead only the part that they are interested in, only the script that they have around fetishization.
And how do you work with that?
Well, as a sex worker, I do work with it a little bit more because in certain kind of negotiated professional contexts, we don't really mind being fetishized. That's part of my work. But when we verge more into the personal spaces, or if somebody like yourself is genuinely curious, how does this go? How do we feel about it? I really try to push back on being seen as a one-dimensional person, being seen only as a set of genitals. Um, I think that we should engage with each other as those full humans whenever possible. So I do try to remind people of that.
In one of our podcasts, another trans man, Eddie, I'm sure you know him,
Mhm.
and he
I
said
do.
that he literally sends instructions to his clients who are meeting
Uh-huh.
him for the first time. Do anything similar to this?
I do sometimes. What I've honestly found, which is delightful, is that in the moment, whether it's with a client or a scene partner or whatever, it's actually not that complicated. That's what I end up telling people. My body is no more complicated than anyone else's. And the questions that people should be asking and engaging with through an intimate encounter are actually no different whether your partner is trans or cisgender. We should all be asking each other, what do you like? How do you like to be touched? More or less, harder or softer. So I actually try to move away from this idea of exceptionalizing my trans body and more towards modeling good communication that I think is just good practice for everyone in any kind of situation. That said, though, I do sometimes have my kind of quick and dirty summary that's like, this is what feels good. Don't do this. Please do that. I really like this. And again, to be honest, my body is pretty simple that way. Like most people, I enjoy hand touch. I enjoy mouth touch. I personally enjoy penetration. So I'm always like, you guys can figure this out. And in fact, that exceptionalizing, like I said, of imagining that the trans body is like this, separate mythical item, I don't think serves us.
Makes sense. We all don't like the same thing. And, if you want to be a good sexual partner, you figure out what they like
Mhm.
and you make sure that you're both doing that. And it actually, yeah, I guess the genitals almost, they become irrelevant. It's about making sure both people are enjoying the experience.
I wanted to shift the gear and talk a little bit about you being a life coach. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about your practice and who are your clients?
The way that I approach life coaching now, I do incorporate physical elements if people are, want to be in the gym more, want to work on their bodies. But it's really more the psychological, more the therapeutic side that I focus on. I am a sex educator and I work at this point with a lot of other trans and queer folk because there are a lot of kind of shared experiences that I have that I kind of bring into those sessions with my clients. And I think a lot of people who are themselves trans and queer feel very, very poorly served by kind of mainstream medical spaces, mainstream like healthcare spaces, including therapy. Either a lot of people find either that their clinicians focus on their gender or sexuality kind of as the focal point of all the problems. This is why you're here, or conversely, a lot of clinicians are really uncomfortable talking about bodies, gender, sexuality, sex itself. So I kind of bring like my lived experience of these things to work with people, like I said, mostly other trans and queer folk, but not, not explicitly so, not
Yeah.
exclusively so. And really work on, so a lot of my focus is body image stuff, sexuality, of course, sex education, relationships, interpersonal communication, and really helping people with goal setting around these things. And really trying to take a more holistic approach towards what does success look like for this individual. And that's where I think a lot of my lived experience there of not being on a particular or standard path in life really informs how I try to encourage other clients that this is possible. I want to optimize what your life, what your lived experience looks like, as opposed to some kind of one dimensional idea of who we should be, how we should engage.
How do I know if a life coach is something that would work for me? What should I look for in a good life coach?
I think in this moment, the stuff that I notice is if it feels scammy or spammy, it probably is. Like if all of their written materials look like they were generated by ChatGPT, stay away. If it looks like somebody who's just kind of talking about themselves, because they're like the big guy in the gym and therefore knows about personal training, but do they have educational underpinnings? Do they understand the science? Are they able to help with your unique situation? So I think it's looking for people who come across with educational background, experience, I dare say longevity in the industry. In my case, been here for half my life. Then I think that we're all wise enough to pretty quickly suss out, is somebody asking good questions? Is somebody helping me to think things through in my own way, not being directive of how I should feel or what I should do, but instead helping you to kind of explore, who are you? What makes sense for you? What do you want out of it? So I spend a lot of time asking questions. First off, because I'm a very nosy bitch, and also because but really because I know that that's how people get at their own answers. Like, I don't know a client right from the jump, but I know some of the ways to approach things that help them to come to those answers. think of it like more an interpersonal, friendship or whatever. I think it's pretty quick whether you can figure out, like, is there a good connection with this person? Is there a good click? Are they a good listener? Do they ask good questions? Do I feel seen? Do I feel heard? And honestly, a lot of therapeutic spaces like coaching need to start with that same kind of compassion, mutual respect, mutual trust. And then we can grow from there. Then I, as a counselor, can start asking those more probing questions, sometimes even uncomfortable questions for people. But it has to come from this foundation of being seen, being heard, and being respected.
What's the difference between therapy and life coaching?
Mm, absolutely. That's a super important distinction. So I am not a therapist, which means that I am not qualified to diagnose or treat specific conditions.
Hmm.
Obviously, many of my clients are, maybe have depression or have anxiety or whatever, which does not disqualify me from working with them. But it's not my position to either diagnose or treat. But I am also not equipped to do crisis intervention. If somebody is feeling suicidal in that moment, I can be a friend, but I cannot be a therapist. That is outside of my scope of practice. My scope of practice is much more in those really shaping of routines, habits, providing education in the areas that I am equipped for and qualified for. Anything to do with kinesiology, the physical body, physiology, anything to do with kind of trans specific, like gender affirming care, impact of hormones on the body. That's within my scope of practice. And then also sex education, which is this wonderfully broad category of things from pleasure, communication, actual health concerns, sexual health. So it does allow a lot of really broad conversations there. But I do want to clarify it is not a substitute for psychotherapy. In fact, many of my clients have a care team. They may, see a physical therapist for something specific. They may see a psychotherapist for, more complicated, more sticky kind of situations.
Hmm.
And I am an additional support system there.
I like that. And is there any benchmark in terms of how many sessions is healthy
Right.
to have with life coach?
I think it really depends on what people are looking for.
Yep.
Sometimes people come to a life coach with something very simple, kind of very singular. Let's say I'm having a challenging work situation. I need some kind of pathways of how I deal with this, some brainstorming, some strategies. That could be as little as one session. There are people who are looking for more of that ongoing support. They're looking because they're on a longer journey for themselves, maybe sorting out their own gender and sexuality. Maybe we're looking for that ongoing kind of touchstone, that connection. I see one client, for example, monthly, and they come to me with what's going on in their life, in their relationships, in their ongoing unpacking of self, gender, kink, personal expression. And it's that moment to be heard, to be witnessed, and supported through that journey. I think that there's room for people to kind of come in and out of those needs. Sometimes a session is going to be very much like, Trip, here's what's going on. We need to talk about it. Other times it's going to be more of that like meta analysis of who am I? Where am I? What do I need? And being witnessed in that by a coach like myself.
A lot of it feels sort of aimed towards growth.
Very much so.
Whereas obviously when you think of therapy, etc., a lot of that can be quite reflective on what's happened and so
Mhm,
on. But I think,
mhm.
I mean, for me personally, what I found with life coaching, what I really like about it, and with your permission, I'd love to add you into our app under the life coaching section,
Oh,
because
I would be
I
honored.
think your content's great. Life coaching to me seems like a great way of growing as an individual.
Okay.
Like if you're stuck and you maybe don't know where you want to go next in your life, I think that's a
Mhm.
perfect time. And I've been there. I've worked with life coaches where I'm like, oh, what next? And I found them to be really helpful in planning out them next steps in my life.
I think that's absolutely right. I will say, though, that I do believe that understanding deeper roots, deeper contextualization is very important. So, if I had to kind of put a label on the way that I work with people, it's something called a psychodynamic approach, which looks into some of the roots of things. I believe that the only way to really help somebody in their current moment with like a specific immediate situation is also to understand how we got there and what kind of feelings are brought up by even having conversations about it. If somebody has a lot of trauma that is holding them back from even talking about this stuff, how are we going to make progress there?
Mm.
If there are all of those barriers,
Trip will be on our app under life coaches, and I
thank
think
you.
definitely worth reaching out to.
Trip, this was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, educating us, and hopefully our listeners and viewers who are curious more about you will find you on social media, will watch your content, and maybe reach out to you for your life coach. So
Thank you.
Yeah, Trip. Honestly, I genuinely 100% am walking away from this with so much. I feel like I've learned stuff, which I love. And I just love your content. I think it's really, really cool. So yeah, thank you. Keep doing what you're doing. And hopefully we'll have you back again later in the year.
It would be an honor. Thank you so much for the conversation and for the curiosity. And if I may leave people with a little bit of a thought on that, approach the world with curiosity, approach the world with empathy, and approach yourself with the same curiosity and empathy. I think that is the only thing that brings us through really challenging times.
Amazing. Thank you.